Welcome to Compliance Uncomplicated, an interview series dedicated to simplifying the unnecessarily complex world of risk and compliance. Hosted by Drata experts, each episode will tell a new story about high-growth startups and other brands that are building compliance pathways towards a culture of security. Every business, industry, and team has unique challenges when it comes to building trust. And for many startups, compliance is one of the first stepping stones towards that pathway. In each episode, we'll hear from founders, visionaries, and those tasked with building a foundation of trust for their brand. It's time to unravel the jargon and abbreviations and uncomplicate compliance.
Welcome to another episode of Compliance Uncomplicated. My name is Elliot Volkman, the Director of Creative Services here at Drata, and one of your revolving hosts for this series. For those of you who are new, or maybe we need a refresher, this series is a journey and a constant story about different organizations who are navigating their compliance journey, building a culture of cybersecurity, all while accelerating their business at what we refer to as moving at Drata speed. However, I want to introduce you all to the person who will be doing most of the talking, the man, the legend, Mr. MC Kevin Kriebel. Let's learn about yourself since this is your first time on the podcast and kind of go from there.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it, Elliot. My name is Kevin Kriebel. I'm the VP of Business Development and Partnerships here at Drata. I was formerly at Palo Alto Networks through acquisition at a company called Expanse. Actually started my career in tech at Okta about a decade ago, so I've been in cybersecurity for a while. I've been at Drata for a year, just over a year, and my team runs all the indirect routes to market. So all Drata customers that experience the wonderful services from audit firms, from managed service providers, security consultants, etc. That's my team.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. So now that we have the official mouth who has introduced himself, and I'll go and hide back in the background to the most that I can, Ty, let's get to the real guest of this episode. I don't want to, do your LinkedIn profile injustice. You are the current CISO over at Vercel. You are an investor over at SVCI, a wonderful partner to Drata, but you also have a long-standing history of being in this space. Can you shed a little bit more light on, what that background has looked like and how it's led to where you are today?
Yeah, I'm happy to share, and thanks for having me as well. Been a big fan of Drata since the beginning, and obviously as we automate compliance, it changes the game completely, and that is something that we'll probably dig into a little further. But my background is mostly application and product security, so I've been in the security space for going on 18 years this year. It's actually 20 if I consider working full-time during college and some part-time gigs as a webmaster and doing help desk and all this fun stuff. But it's been a journey, but dedicated within information security. It's about 18 years now. And for me, it started out in consulting, traveling the world, doing all sorts of things from red teaming to PCI assessments to SOX assessments. Like it was just a number of different touch points that led me to application security, which I then indexed on for the entirety of my career. From that point, I got right into banking. So I went over to JP Morgan Chase when I was in my mid-20s, and for some reason they trusted me and their corporate internet group and protecting all of the web-facing assets. And to me, that was pretty wild to have that experience. And I built a lot of cool stuff while I was there. From there, I grew up at another company called Capital One. I spent about 5.5 years, the longest place I've ever worked. And if I stayed for year 6, I'd probably still be there today, but I'm glad I left. And I left because we did a lot of M&A. I was inspired to kind of join the startup scene through that process. So from Capital One, I started to attempt to move down and get to California ultimately and be in the Bay Area. But I took a pit stop in the Midwest at a company called Target, spent about a year there building out product security, and then ultimately shifted out here to San Francisco. And then I've been working with smaller and smaller organizations and then helping them grow and scale since. So my first startup was Periscope Data, which was then acquired by Sisense, and I spent 4 years with them and ultimately just joined Vercel about 1 year ago as their Chief Information Security Officer. So that's a little bit about me.
Cool. Yeah, that's quite the legacy there.
Yeah, I was going to say, Ty, thanks for the intro. We got a lot of questions, a lot of stuff that we want to get to here. But I think even before we get into any of that, I'd love to understand, you said it, you were at a company for 5 years, and that's the longest tenure, right? The average tenure of CISO in general and security professionals as it stands today is in that like 1 to 2 year range. I'd love to kind of understand why you think that is. Is that a problem in the market? Is that a problem because we're so understaffed that from a security position that stuff's coming up? What do you think it is?
Well, I think we've actually done some harm to ourselves in the security space. We created a large demand by generating more and more jobs. I operate on the opposite. I want to make the smallest, most powerful, mightiest team that I can have, and I don't want as many humans. And the reason being that is that you have a tighter connection. It's a lot more fun that way, and you grow through building. When you scale too quickly and then you have a single person for a single thing or a subject matter, it doesn't always lend itself to the best outcomes. And I think if you look at some of those metrics, the 1 to 2 years really depends. If you're looking at CISOs, that's no longer the case. It's trending upwards because I think more and more companies are realizing, as well as CISOs, you can't get it done in a year. It's a multi-year journey, and there's a place where you're meant to be to help grow it up. And then there's going to be a lot of changes. And if you don't agree with some of those changes, it could be a good time to pivot and switch. I think one of the challenges that a lot of people face in this space is that it's taxing, it's stressful, and it's unique in itself that there are certain other groups that understand what we do. And these are support functions within organizations. We don't bring, annual recurring revenue into the pipeline. Sometimes we do if we're really good at what we do and we have a connection and there's a relationship and someone asked you for a favor and you're like, sure, I'll do that because my friend wants to buy our product. Great. Yeah. But in the reality of it, we are here as a cost center. And as a cost center, you constantly ask for more budget, more headcount, and trying to explain why you need to grow a team can be very tough. And there are times where budgets get crunched, and I think this year is no exception. I think there's a mounting amount of stress as you keep staying. You understand more of where those bodies are at and where all the risks are and where the landmines you don't want to step on again are at. And then it is nice. I can be honest with you. It is nice to pivot, switch jobs, start fresh, take a lot of the lessons learned and leave the baggage behind. And I wish we could see a little bit more continuity with folks beyond 1 to 2 years, but I totally understand it. I have a couple of shops I went in, and by day 90, I knew it wasn't for me, but I have a commitment that I'm going to stay at least 1 year to get through the thing before I say, that's enough, I'm tapping out. And I think that's something that it doesn't behoove all of us to go through that motion, because if you're on day 30 and you go, this really isn't for both of us, it's a mutually agreed upon thing, then let's part ways. So I'd be curious, like from a statistics standpoint, where are we getting those numbers for 1 to 2 years versus where I believe CISOs are at now is like 3 to 4 years, to be honest.
It's probably security SaaS companies trying to get you to buy their platform. Oh, your CISO is going to leave soon. You better buy us. You said a lot of things in that answer. So let me just dive into a couple to kind of double click. So the idea of we do hear this quite a bit, right? Security is the most understaffed position in IT. And to your point, that could be because we're creating too many jobs where we should be using more automation to solve that problem. So I guess my question would be, how much of that is CISOs being kind of weary of automation? Like, hey, is this firewall or endpoint protection, et cetera, actually going to do what it's supposed to do? Versus there's actually not the right vendors out there to kind of help with those solutions. How much do you think it's like a one or the other, or maybe a combination of both?
I think before we even start talking about vendors, we have to talk about the CISO themselves. And based on how they have their practitioner mindset, are they just a pure play executive CISO? Are they a talking head CISO? Are they an operator? And I consider myself an operational CISO. So I build. I run the engine as needed. I want to make sure when my people take time off, I still know how to run those engines. Sometimes I'll delay it and slow it down a little bit because I don't want to take on a full workload. But at the same time, it just varies. And I think if you're a CISO that does not want to be hands-on and you just want to do executive talks and not manage risk and not know the reality of incident response and not get on calls to really get the DNA and the empathy, you're going to have a different experience. I find it very important in your first year, especially if you're in a startup, to get into it with the team. And if you don't get into it, make sure you hire the right people that are going to be there with the team to do the work. If you're going to hire a group of 20 people to run a security operations center and no one in the company understands what security is, I think you did the wrong job. Like if there's no live coaching, if there's no real time feedback, if there's no collaborative experience that allows the security team to also understand what is the business, you're all going to miss the boat and you're not going to have a long career there because you're not going to understand how to do security for the org. So for me, the practitioner mindset allows you to really embed yourself and then understand what is it that we sell? Why do we sell it this way? And how do we make sure we protect the customers that are choosing to buy it from us? On the flip side to that, I want to make sure it's very easy for sales, partners, whoever else I'm working with, that they have the right trust kit or the security collateral or a web interface to self-service for someone else to say, yes, for us, Vercel is the right choice because look, we just get access to all these things and it's super easy. So I think that's a differentiator in my mind versus someone that may not want to understand and they just want to play the hits as a security leader.
No, it's helpful. One of the other things you hit on was like sometimes just wanting to start fresh, right? So kind of following along that, let's pretend you started fresh today. You came in as a CISO at new company X. For you, like, what's the first things that you care about coming in as a CISO, right? Like what, not necessarily like what's a 30, 60, 90, but like, you've come in, like, what are we doing first that we're like, hey, I want to get my hands around this. Take me through that a little bit.
To me, it's really what's on fire.
Yeah.
What's the biggest deal that's going to be done? What is important to the business? What are the priorities? And I think if you're connected to what the business is actually working on, as opposed to I'm going to scamper off and be like, hey, I got to update this information security policy. I'm going to do that anyway. No one actually needs to know or care about it. But when I really think of the experiences of every place I've started at in my career, from fintech to startups, it's also getting connection. And I want to understand who are my partners, who are my stakeholders, who are my detractors, who are my change agents, right? And then if I have security champions, even better. But if I don't have advocacy within the organization, I'm going to have a tough route. Why are you here? Well, that's a good question. When people can tell you what your job is, it's interesting to hear that perspective too. Because if you have 8 people telling you, you need to go fix this problem, and maybe it's a person, maybe it's a process, maybe it's a deal not getting closed. And I can tell you in startup land, it's often a deal that's blocked by a person like me on the other side. And I remember my first time joining, a Series B startup that I mentioned already. And they're like, there's a guy like Ty that's saying no because we don't have X and Y. And I'm like, interesting that you would just point me out like that from the beginning. I'm happy to help. It would be good to know these things in advance of a public, decree.
Right.
But let's go solve that. But what's interesting is if you take that energy and you shift it back and say, cool, I talked to that person. They are a CISO. They're very logical in what they were talking about. And I explained where we're at. How did I get that information? Well, I worked with our engineering team. I worked with our infrastructure team, and I worked with our legal team. Now the deal is done. I've just bought collateral. I've just bought relationship, and I've bought brand to get shit done. So I think it's really important to understand what is important to the business. And that's not always an easy thing if you think it's just security. It's not.
Yeah, a lot of that is going to be you discerning, right? Because like I've done this before, even here, where you come into a place and there's a bunch of stuff that's on fire, and everybody's got a different perspective, right? So having a framework kind of in place, and part of that's why you're in the position you're in, I think, right? It's because your ability to discern, to decide, make a decision. There's a lot of people that are like, hey, this is a problem, and then you have to be, well, I don't think it's a problem, or yeah, but it's not as big of a problem as these things are. To that person, it might be their biggest problem, but like your job is to have that kind of greater purview. So I appreciate that. The next part, I want to keep focusing on you as a CISO. We'll kind of get into the advisor side here in a bit. But it's like kind of the idea, and maybe I'm wrong, so correct me here. My experience has been in selling to CISOs is that there's 2 different types of companies. There's companies where security is a initiative, and there's companies where security is a story. I've sat in front of Fortune 100 CISOs that will remain nameless, who I've shown them exposed RDP, Telnet, whatever, and them say, is that a problem? I have cyber insurance, right? And so I think that's the other question I have is kind of, from your perspective, you obviously have a lot of CISO friends. I'm sure you think, different things to different people. What amount is and maybe factor cyber insurance into this, how much of the market is that story versus initiative? Is that just a thing that like salespeople think? Is it reality? Is cyber insurance hurting or helping that? What do you think there?
Why do you need a CISO if that's the mentality?
Totally agree with you. But there's Fortune 100 companies where the CISO, literally prior to being promoted into CISO, was the help desk guy.
I get it. And if I were on that board educating the rest of the board, I would say, why do we need that CISO? I've had these discussions in the past, and I think it's interesting when someone says, like a hypothetical, if you had money to spend on one thing, what would it do? It'd be fire me, go get cyber insurance. They're not wrong, but you're not going to have the controls. You're not going to have the understanding of management of what is your attack surface. You don't even know what an attack surface is at that point.
Yeah.
But if you're sitting down explaining, hey, this is an exposed S3 bucket and all of your customer information is just leaking out, I would be like, I don't think it's offended. I'm saddened. I'm disappointed that there are folks in our community that have a chief information security officer title, and maybe it's because of how many people they manage or how much budget or how many just executive meetings they have to do, but they're not connected anymore. They're disconnected. So why even do that job? Because I find it very important, as a protector, as a defender of the organization, as the legal entity of the executive team, of every person in the company, it's my job to give them confidence and feel safe in their organization and what they do and how they do it. I think it's a travesty. So for me, it just sucks to hear when you're going and dealing with those folks, but maybe that's their tact. Maybe that's why they just want to negotiate hard and say, well, we have cyber insurance. Why would I buy this? If that's how they do it, maybe I should get into coaching, because I would just go, why don't I name the 5 other vendors that are in your space, explain how I've had a relationship with them for X amount of time, and it's very unlikely that you're going to break into some capability unless you have something tangible. Show me value, right? Don't just talk to me and say, look at this problem. Show me actual value of what your product can do. And I think the best founders I've ever dealt with, they literally show up and they go, nice to meet you. I don't need to hear about all your problems. I don't actually care about all your problems, but I've created a solution based on inspiration from X, Y, and Z store, whatever the background may be. And they say, you should try using the tool. If it works, I'm very happy. We'll figure something out. If it doesn't work for you, no problem. And then they just walk away. I really dislike the person that comes up and says, let me tell you how I'm going to solve everything for you.
Yeah, of course.
You should have my job. You should do what I'm doing if you can solve everything for me. That's not reality. So I think that's the part that I get hung up on a little bit by that question.
No, yeah, that makes sense. So then I'm taking part of that and transitioning that from you as a CISO to you as an advisor, and let's kind of start with the CISO being more involved at the board level. I think that's starting to come up more and more. But one of the things I've noticed in the last few years is that the amount of solutions like a Tenable or whatever that has a dashboard that would enable a CISO to present in a board meeting, right? That's starting to happen more often now. So it seems like the CISO is getting more of a seat at the table in board meetings. Are you seeing that? And what do you think about that transition?
I hope it's true. I hope to that outcome to be true. I'm happy here at my current location at Vercel, where I'm asked to join. I actually have interactions with our board members on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the founders. It depends on the team. It depends on if you're publicly traded. So I'm talking from a startup experience. From a publicly traded experience, I think you have to do it as a CISO. It's going to be required in the near future, right? You need that representation at minimum on an annual basis, because if you're not covering what are risks and you don't talk about information security or cybersecurity, whatever you want to call it, I think you're missing a large part of the boat when it comes to understanding the business. But in startups, these are the things that could end your startup. This could really kill your burn rate, because not only are you tapping into cyber insurance, your premiums are going to go all out of wild the next year, but also just paying for protection, paying for the cleanup, paying for the psychological trauma that people have just gone through with a major incident. You're going to lose humans in the process, and it's going to be painful. So I think about where we're going as an industry, and I'm actually very excited, because I think that gives you more opportunity to represent this community. And then I hope, going back to the last question, those CISOs that maybe are tapped out and have stopped caring, and they just say, I have cyber insurance. Well, maybe the board goes, this ain't the one.
Yeah.
We've interacted with a lot of CISOs across the world now. this ain't the one. This is not the person we want running for security if they believe cyber insurance is the thing. And if the narrative comes back from the leadership team, oh, that was our help desk guy, like you just portrayed, they're going to go, why did we choose said person? We probably need someone with a little bit more experience, wisdom, or exposure to what we do in our industry to understand what is our threat profile? How are we going to protect against the things that make us get nervous every day?
Yeah.
Right.
That's great. I guess, to that point, right? When I made that statement of like, I'm seeing on average CISOs being more involved at the board level, you're like, I hope so. So I guess my question is, what's been the gap? Like, what's been the disconnect as to why CISOs haven't been traditional? Like, why is that not an industry standard? Why is that something that we're just now starting to see improve?
I'm curious too, but my hypothesis on that one is what we do in security and IT. IT is a little bit less, sexy about like running the business, but I think it's underrepresented in the Bay Area. It actually frustrates me quite a lot that like a lot of IT folks are underpaid. And that's something I am firmly the opposite, because security doesn't exist without IT. And I hope people in the world or people that listen to this understand, treat your IT team with respect and care, because they have the keys to the kingdom. They can make your experience very bad. And like, that's not the team to make upset. But when I think of why have security leaders not been in the boardroom, I think it's hard, because what if the business isn't prioritizing the budget, and that now the leader just gets that one chance to be like, yeah, so here were all the incidents from last quarter, and they're going to go, I don't know if I legally want to hear this information right now. I don't know if we're ready to hear this information, right? Like, it could be a risk to that team. That's one hypothesis. The other side is, I don't think there's taxonomy for folks to really have that intelligent conversation. When you're focused on growing a business or maintaining a business or looking at just run the engine burn rates now for publicly traded companies, it's a hard discussion. And I think if you started adding on, our source code leaked, our keys got stolen, this person broke into the building, the stress that comes with that, as opposed to the portrayal of positivity, the number of impressions, the number of deals, the logos we just ascertained, like, it's a very different discussion than what a security person would be bringing to the table. And I think it's going to be hard to kind of make that middle ground between what your executive leadership team wants in that conversation and what you believe to be true. I work in a great leadership team. We're all figuring it out together. We're all pretty new together. And within a year, like, I had the chance to go to the board, and it was going to be a once a year thing. And now it's hey, let's maybe do this twice a year. And I'm like, double the opportunity. Great. And it's not that I had my message contoured. It's that I'm tight with the business and understanding what is important for our board to know, because that's just a different customer of the service that I'm offering to the organization. So I think you need a CISO that's connected. If you have a CISO that's connected, then they will likely be able to show up to that board meeting, not just bring your Nessus tool in your dashboard. That's the wrong way to do it. No one cares about that. You have to connect back to risk and understanding and the EQ of what they care about. So if they're hearing all this stuff about, what is malware, or what is, blockchain, or what is happening with crypto locker, you have to tap into news feeds. You have to tap into what is, the Harvard Business Review. There are certain things that you're going to have to understand. Who is your board? Where is their background? What are they likely to care about? And how do you give them enough information to either follow up with questions to have a detailed discussion, or give them enough to keep doing what you're doing and be trusted and have the confidence that you get to keep going for a couple more years?
No, this is great. And I'm sure there's a bunch of startups that are probably watching this right now. So I kind of want to transition even further now away from you being CISO and into SBCI and the great work that organization is doing. So when it comes to investing, advising, obviously you guys get to be choosy because of just the level of an organization that you've built. What are you guys looking for, right? Like, when you're deciding who to work with, who to invest in. Like, if I'm a startup today and I'm hearing what you're saying, I'm like, man, I really want Ty involved in what we're doing. What do they need to be doing to be able to attract somebody or a firm like SBCI?
Yeah, so SBCI is very interesting. We've been around for about 3.5 years. I started maybe 90 days after it started, and I'm really thankful with the team. So it's Silicon Valley CISO Investment Group. We're 55 practicing CISOs. We have the help of GGV on the back ends for some of our investments and the vehicles. Like, there's certain things we can't do as just CISOs. Sure. But what we can do is work off the side of our desk and understand what's necessary in the industry. I think what's cool for me is I've translated what I did within application and product security directly back into the investment side of the house, where now there's even more gain and benefit. But then now I have to be very careful with conflicts of interest, contouring, just even what we talked about before we even got into this chat. Like, I will remove myself from a lot of the conversations if I have a conflict of interest, because I've learned enough from case law, people going to jail, like, and also ethics. I've been trained in ethics and integrity enough to know that I need to be very conscientious of my team. And I don't want to bring bias to my team and understanding if I'm bringing technology in and we're doing a design partnership and I'm an investor in it, I can't force it down their throat. That's inappropriate. But what I have to think about as a CISO that's doing this is I'm well outside of that realm and I'm doing investigations into things that I'm fascinated by. What's going on in the data security posture management space? What's happening with identity access management just in time permissions? Where is the next wave for automated artifact compliance gathering? Because, wow, this whole industry of audit, when it's rinse and repeat over and over and I have to produce the same results, tell me an engineer that would say, that's cool, you should do that once a year, every year. No engineer would say that. Like, if I have to do it again twice and it's the same thing, I'm going to write a script for it. So when I think of the need or the drive or the demand, I'm working towards investing to help my peers. And then my goal is that I'm positioned in a non-public company, so I have the ability to go do these extracurriculars nights and weekends, and it's fun. Like, I'm very engaged by the work that we do because I get to interact with founders that the sky is the limit. And when you work as a CISO, the limit is the sky, and you have to opposite interact with your own brain to say, I get to work with energetic people that are really focused on a mission to solve a problem that is probably plaguing all of us. And I will say, through SBCI, we've had some really good choices early on, and our focus is in seed and startup. We don't want to do like late stage. It doesn't make sense. We don't have money like that. We're CISOs that are like, here's a small check, because this makes it interesting for us, because now we're beyond vested, versus if you're an advisor, maybe you get equity or maybe you get a payment to do advisor work or consultant work. But it's very different when you're an investor on the front end to say, you know what? I believe in this founding team. I am confident that I can help them. And I hope they want to work together. And if it's mutually beneficial, I hope that we end up somewhere in the stars, because if we're shooting for the clouds, I think we will get there.
No, that's great. Okay, and so kind of, again, going through the advisor route, I guess you're giving out free advice here, so don't give out too much. If I'm a startup and I'm looking to, hire a CISO for the first time, I've been outsourcing security and I'm ready to start kind of building it in-house. What's your advice on, what I should be looking for profile-wise? What are the kind of questions I should be asking? Because it's obviously it's a pretty massive choice, and a significant inflection point for the company. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the first things first, if CISOs are attending more board meetings, tap your board members. Because if your board members are aware of the CISO community, well, maybe they'll go to that company and say, hey, we got an opportunity. Here's what it looks like. Do you know someone? And if it's in the portfolio family, or if it's at a product company that I really care about, like, I'm going to do my best to go search my whole network. And I think that's something that is important to understand. Like, it's hard to just put a job rec out there and end up with the perfect candidate.
For sure.
Sometimes it happens, sometimes it's going to happen. But as we've seen with resumes and how, even today, we're seeing a little bit more challenge and opportunity with people that are taking on 2 to 3 jobs at a time because they're working from home and they're just faking it until they make it. And it is interesting to see that the paradigm shift is here. That's a whole separate topic. But hiring your first CISO, I think I would really understand, do you need your CISO yet? That's number one. That's table stakes for me. It might just be a head of security, because if you hire a CISO, like a person like me, I also join and I go, all right, so it's very unlikely I'll ever have a title change in the next X amount of years. Is that a problem? No, probably not. But if my role is much larger than just CISO, well, I'll probably be bringing someone along for the journey to take that role. There'll be a deputy at some point, and then they'll be the CISO, and I'll have a different title. I'm cool with that. But I think if you're looking for your CISO, there are special firms that can help with this, that can allow you to identify the right person. And I think it's important, again, to socialize well outside of your team of leadership to make sure that you're baselining against the industry. Because what I've found in past 2 to 3 years, there's an undersizing of comp, an undersizing of performance, an undersizing of budget and headcount. And sometimes they want CISOs to come in that aren't even going to get paid as much as a senior security engineer. And they go, but it's a great job for you. And you go, how much are you paying? No one would want that amount of stress and risk for your threat profile for that little amount. So I think making sure that you're grounded in what you're looking for, that's step one, right? So knowing if you actually need it, being grounded. After that, I think you start getting into table stakes of really breaking down to set this job up for success. And if it's just to run, the engine on a day-to-day basis with a really well-defined role, it's probably not a CISO. I think CISOs are meant to really build and then take it to the next level. And for whatever energy they have, the ability that they have, they should make it better for the next person that's going to be going into that. And if you hire the right CISO and you empower them the correct way, they will do their best to find a replacement, because they don't want their team to just drown the second they leave. They want their team to hang on for a certain amount of time. But if the team will not pay for that next CISO, or they're unwilling to work with the current CISO, then you're going to have more trouble. So I don't know. I think it's very contextual for the actual company for me to give real advice. But those are my generics.
No, that's great. And then, I kind of think this continues to dive into, from an advisory standpoint, just hearing your experience and successes. But you've been at Vercel for just over a year. What are you most proud of in terms of what Vercel is doing today? And then less macro, more micro, specifically what your team is doing to facilitate the growth and the mission for Vercel.
I think what Vercel is doing is exciting to me as a CISO, is that we're going to be eliminating a lot of the supply chain when it comes to deployment of software. We are asking teams to trust us quite a bit when it comes to build, deploy, host, but we're giving the control. We're ensuring that you as an owner have that responsibility well understood. I'm working on documentation to make it better, but I'm excited for how software is going to be created by engineers and delivered by engineers, not a broken, archaic process that I've been doing my whole career. So when I met the founder, Guillermo Rauch, man, this was 2 Novembers ago. I had 2 or 3 chats with him. I only interviewed with Vercel. I knew Vercel was for me. I chose correctly. We are changing the way software is delivered, and I'm also now helping with the future of what will be delivered as well, and thinking about those security touch points. And for the team that is joining me on this journey, we're all engaged on this because it's absolutely going to eliminate, reduce, and allow teams to actually have intelligence in how software is shipped. A lot of the places I've worked in my time, it's an idea. It is a process. It is a software development lifecycle, but in reality, it's tough to keep up. And then what about your marketing team? What about your partnership team? What about data just flowing out the door? It's very tough. But if we look at it from a source code or a framework standpoint, that is what makes me the most proud, is we're transforming the way not only software is going to work and be delivered, but how the internet and the future of communication and how we interact as a society. And if we do it right, I'm very confident that I will be heavily involved with changing the way the internet works. And we will eliminate a lot of the noise that has plagued my entire life. And I will tell you, if we learned how to validate inputs 17, 18 years ago, I probably wouldn't have worked in application security. But the fact that I could bring that same narrative and message around what is SQL injection, what is cross-site scripting, what is validating your input, what is knowing what's happening in a system to establish trust, I probably wouldn't be focused on security as much.
That's a good point. No, it's great. Honestly, even the way how passionate you are when you're talking about that and other stuff, you sound like the CEO of the company. You sound like somebody who started the company.
Nah, he's super smart. I'm sure. He's if you hear him speak, you will be like, wow, this guy knows what he's talking about. He knows exactly why he started this company and where we're going.
Totally. But you sound so attached to it, right? It's great.
How could I not be? This is what we should do as CISOs. Like if I'm not bought into this mission, I need to go get another job. So your second question, what makes me proud about our team? Well, we were able to scale to 430 plus people. We were able to build in a lot of controls. We were able to understand how to deploy a procurement process. Like there's just a lot of stuff that goes into this. That's not just a pure play of security. It's starting with the base premise of how should a business work? What are the controls? What are the consistent processes to make a great employee experience? So when I have anyone, any human that joins our company, I want them to have a consistent, repeatable experience. So then I know when they start, they are empowered and engaged to go do what they are meant to do. Not how do I do this training? Where do I sign off on this policy? Like all that stuff should be easy.
Yeah.
Why don't you bring your subject matter skills and start helping us build this brighter future together? And that's what I'm really proud of is our team unified immediately. And we just got to work. We did probably about 18 months of work in 6 months. And it was chaos. And now that we're like 6 to 8 months removed from that, the team and the core that we've created for me is a very powerful one. And we are tiny, we are small, but the amount of outputs and outcomes we get to have as a remote team, like I'm impressed by it. I'm also multiple times burned out through the process. But what's cool is each time we add a person, it's less painful because it's not I burn out and I can't recover. It's I burn out, my team recognizes it. They allow me to recover, and the same goes for everyone else. Because when you're in that high performance, high scalability, hyper growth mode, it is tough. It is going to be painful. This is not for everyone. And we have to recognize that too. And as we build this type of future for ourselves, we want to make sure the people that can help us with it are empowered to just go.
I'm telling you, you make me want to go work in security. Obviously, I have to ask you about compliance.
Sure.
Compliance has been something I can remember a decade ago working at software companies and getting asked for my SOC 2 and not knowing what that meant. And then bugging my CISO and him asking me like, I can meet in 2 weeks. But like this idea of continuous compliance, it seems new, right? It
Sure.
might not be. I can't say for sure. I haven't been in your seat before, but it still seems that a lot of the market is kind of pushed back on the importance of continuous compliance and whether or not that matters, right? Because like obviously compliance and security, there's some overlap, but they are different, right? We're not, compliance isn't necessarily saying you won't get breached, but kind of what's your perspective there on the importance of that, just the evolution of compliance as a whole and where GRC is going, in your opinion?
I think it's the importance of transparency. That's it. And why are people scared? It's hard to be transparent. You know what else is scary? Incidents, risks, exceptions. So if I did continuous compliance, I'm sure I would be nervous too. Yeah. We have a commitment to where we're going. I think it is hard to know that how much information is appropriate. And I think even status pages for a lot of teams can be very scary. Yeah. When do we tell them a service is down? Well, what if it's just one service in one region versus it's like the whole platform just got hosed? Well, what if it's the whole platform got hosed because some nefarious people are somehow with our admin credentials and we're working it could be a number of things. So that continuous compliance piece, that transparency is very difficult to accept. So if you look at the evolution of compliance itself, and I guess I'm thankful, that I've been through so much at this point, but look at SAS 70s. SAS 70s could have been like, hey, you know what? We got door locks and we got keys, and only so many people have keys to those door locks. And that's what a SAS 70 report could have been, whatever scope you defined it as. SSAE 16 started to come along. That made a little more sense, but that sort of assessment still wasn't solid or tangible enough for a lot of people. So even in fintech and banking, we started creating questionnaires and a whole working group around this thing. And that questionnaire is so scary now. It's too many pages, too many questions, too much context. And I think where we're landing, SOC 2 Type 1 is a good example of where we're at. A lot of teams are celebrating the fact that they can get a SOC 2 Type 1. That's like, you know what? I can do my taxes one day of the year and I'll submit them. They'll be good enough. Government will be kind of happy. They'll take some more money. Great. But now if I had to show the government every day of the year that I am auditable, well, I honestly, I wish myself luck in having a good memory and tracking all these things, but that commitment to a SOC 2 Type 2 on a consistent basis, it is tough. So again, when we go back to it, I think you're going to find a lot of struggle to this idea of consistent, continuous commitment, and then just displaying this data. But I think as we're growing up, more and more teams are starting to understand incidents are going to occur, code's going to leak, credentials are going to slip, people are going to steal stuff, things are going to break. And the more you actually communicate that in a thoughtful way, I think you will have a lot more trust as opposed to, I'm banging on the door of a vendor. I see stuff on the dark web. Is that our stuff? Did that come from you? No, there's no problem. Okay, well, let's go look around our shop a little bit more. And then next thing you know, 7 days later, the vendor reports a breach. And you go, I can understand why they said no. But now here we are. And now we're reading their documentation and we're going to go, well, that's not an independent report. They only had a SOC 2 Type 1, so that kind of makes sense, but there's no exceptions listed. Who was this vendor that gave them their SOC 2 Type 1? Okay, now we have more questions. So I think as we think of the chain of trust, it's not going to be an easy journey. But I think if we have the right partners and we as a community of practitioners and service providers that rely on supply chain to run businesses, we need that information to be successful. Otherwise, you're just running on popsicle sticks and duct tape and you're just hoping for the best. And that's not a risk-based approach.
No, that's fair. No, Ty, this has been great. I'm certainly not out of questions, but I am out of time, it looks like. Elliot?
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Ty, you have been a wonderful guest. The passion that you have for what you do and your ability and understanding to hopefully convey to other organizations that will be walking in your shoes, I think is incredibly important. And just throw out there, since we've already roped you in to be on our panel at Drataverse, I think we're going to get round 2 of this between the two of you, and we'll actually have Daniel tied to that panel as well. But just absolutely appreciate your time and your expertise to be joining this panel. And I guess Kevin for talking to you. That's appreciated as well.
Thank you. Definitely looking forward to the next chats.
Thank you for listening to Compliance Uncomplicated, a Drata podcast. To learn more about the series, go to drata.com/uncomplicated. Discuss this episode on our community secured at community.drata.com or subscribe to our newsletter, Trusted, to stay up to date on the latest episodes.